All right, Louis, the recording started if we want to get started.
Okay, Francisco, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, do you want to talk us through the issue?
Yeah, so I saw the recording from last week. I put this same topic last week, and I got some feedback from kids about because I previously suggested to add this scope delimited string delimited strings for custom claims in the JWB tokens as an envoy variable. So it was not good enough, and I agree that this should be like an API extension. So I created a new PR in the Istio API repository to add this under the request authentication. So I'm looking for some feedback around this. This is something that is affecting people that is using previous version from 121 Istio, and it is basically a change of behavior, because before was it was splitting all the string lists inside any scope field, and now it's only hard coding for scope and permissions. So we have in the code directly only space delimited fields for scope and permissions, and every other field that we want to put there, it is not doing this split. So I know that open this again, it will be like, okay, going back to what we have before. But I think adding a field inside the request authentication is good, because we can default those two, and if we want to add a new custom field, we can add it under this new field in the API.
Okay, yeah, so I guess right now what you're asking for is a review of the API,
Yeah,
then commitment to get that into some release.
yeah.
This change between 121 and 122, when we're a little distance from those things. Is there any expectation of backporting, or?
No. This is something that can be added in 128 if it's possible, and we don't need to backport this.
Okay. Okay, so folks should pick up the review. Hopefully we can close that out pretty quickly if the API change is pretty small. It doesn't look that complicated. But you need at least a couple of TOC people. Does anyone want to volunteer to review it? It sounds like Keith's been looking at it. I can take a look at it too from an API standpoint.
Yeah, I can review from an API perspective, and we'll probably want someone from security to look at the implementation.
Okay, Francisco, is that what you need at the moment?
Yeah, that's what I need. Thanks a lot, Luis.
You can also harass me and Keith on Slack if we're not timely. Cameron.
Yep. Hello. So yeah, I wanted to check if anybody had any initial concerns about supporting the new CEL sampler for OTel and adding that expansion to the Istio proxy to allow us to use CL sampling when we sample with OTel. So the main reason behind wanting to do this is we wanted to move some of our logics from our OTel collectors into initially, you know, when to make the decision before the traces are collected, just to limit the amount of traces that we're collecting. So it seems like it should be pretty easy to POC out, but I just wanted to gather if anybody had any initial concerns of just exposing the expansion so then it can be used by an Envoy filter to be implemented.
Is this sampling or filtering? Just to be precise about the expected functionality here.
So I believe this is making the sampling decisions.
Okay, have you tested, or you're going to plan to test randomness features in cell as well for people who want to use combinations of filter expressions and random sampling?
Yep, I can test both those cases.
Yeah, I think they have like a composite sampler or something.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure. Yeah. Now they could have just put a random function into their cell environment, but
Yeah,
that would make things too easy.
I mean, that seems like a better, more reusable feature.
I will say that in a different project, I just implemented this exact feature, and I just made the cell expression evaluate to a Boolean or a float, and the float is a random chance that it's sampled. But anyhow, I don't think we're going to change Envoy. That's just an aside.
It's worth exploring, but obviously, I don't know the set of functions automatically bound in Envoy today as part of cell. There are some. Rand might be one of them.
I'm pretty sure it's not because we've seen. Actually, don't we have this exposed in telemetry? Maybe. I mean, we must not. Oh, it's access logging. We have a filter.
Yeah.
I've seen people for access log filter. To do random, they'll have like look at the request UID.
Oh, just like mod the request UID and then.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, I can choose any divisible of 16 for whether it's random or not.
Wouldn't the random case be like covered by the random sampler, or?
In this case, it would be, yeah. But you
Yeah.
might want to. You could like want something more complicated, like if you know, this header is set, have a 10% chance, otherwise 90% chance or whatever.
Right.
It's not a, like, I think for many cases it's fine, but it is just a odd gap that they don't have a random function.
Sounds good.
Yeah, maybe open up an issue with the Envoy folks about getting a random function into the cell runtime. It's probably not that hard. It might actually be there, but because time should be in there, right? Well, not exactly
Yeah, time
random.
stuff, yeah. I don't know if you can get the current time, but you can at least work on timestamps.
Okay. I have no logical objections here. Just, you know, I think that's my only real question. Like, obviously, the use case is I want to turn up or down sampling for some specific detailed set of criteria, but I don't want to mess with the sampling for other things, right? It would be the use case. So.
Yep, I can obviously test to make sure that those cases are covered.
Okay. Any objections, anyone? Are we just going to say GFC generally in favor? Okay. Andrew. Oh, do you want reviewers? Do you want people to volunteer to be reviewers for that camera? Or are you a little too early for that? Okay, we can just move on. Andrew, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so I'm the proxy because a colleague of mine who is really asking this is not awake anymore. But basic idea is looking into using a cross namespace waypoint and then using authorization policies. And like in Sidecar, there'd be the concept of I make a workload selector list policy that is namespaced, so it applies to all pods in the namespace. And so then you can make a policy that says, like, I don't know, Prometheus can scrape everything here in this namespace. And you could achieve the same thing if you're using a waypoint for that specific namespace, because then you can make a waypoint bound authorization policy that applies to all traffic through the waypoint. And because that waypoint is only serving one namespace, it applies to the entire namespace. But if you have a waypoint that is serving multiple namespaces, at the moment, there's no API to say waypoint X allow Prometheus to scrape this namespace. It has to either be this service or the entire waypoint, or like target ref of this service or target ref of the whole waypoint.
I guess first question, is Prometheus the actual use case?
No, I'm just making that up right now.
Yeah, just because very specifically with Prometheus, it scrapes workloads, not.
Yeah, that was probably a terrible example of my part. So yeah, sorry. So I'm thinking more to have a layer 7 policy that is applied at a waypoint that serves multiple namespaces. I would like to have an authorization policy that can apply to all the workloads, or I guess all the services, all the targets in a namespace. And I bring it up here not to say like, hey, someone should implement this right away, but more to figure out, is it just that in the past, the authorization policy would never have needed a namespace in the two, so it's never come up? Or are there design reasons why it's just omitted and it won't ever be included?
There's no technical reason other than the scoping of it's two multiple namespaces in this case.
Yeah, like a waypoint would be scoped to serve multiple namespaces, and I want to make an authorization policy that applies, that allows traffic just to one specific namespace in that scope.
What's the reason you're not creating multiple waypoints, one per namespace?
Yeah, so totally, that's a perfectly reasonable question. It would entirely just be resource. In the case where you have, hundreds of these, which the case that this is bringing up would have hundreds of thousands, it would be more convenient to be able to group them rather than to make one per namespace.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense.
Also, though, it could be a perfectly reasonable argument of that's got a bit worse of a security guarantee, of course, because then you've got one envoy serving multiple tenants, and that is a bad thing. Maybe it's a position from Istio of like, we just rather have the security guarantee.
We said up front that we were okay letting people make their own security choices. We would recommend what we considered best practice and inform you how to make the choice, but it's your choice to make. Keith?
Yeah, I remember when we were discussing the change in the waypoint architecture after we eliminated hairpinning, the question did come up about whether or not we should allow cluster-wide waypoints. And I think that from what I remember, the conclusion we came to was that is too much of a security gun, so to speak. And that namespace was the sort of the greatest granularity that we were comfortable with. I think it's reasonable to ask that same question again. But I think historically that was the reason. And so the API sort of followed from that decision.
I don't think it was quite that. Right, the default recommendations are based on that, right? And cluster-wide is a footgun for SPA, but is also a valid use case for appliance.
I kind of wondered. Yeah, I could see this not being a feature either from like a path dependent of it was never important in Sidecar, and then waypoints were single namespace at first, and they had been extended to multiple namespace, and so the API never catches up. Or I could see it as a kind of like what you're saying, Keith, to protect people from doing something they probably shouldn't. We have this other solution that is use multiple waypoints if you really want multiple waypoints, or if you really want, that granularity.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not necessarily saying that I think it's a bad feature or too much of a foot gun. As Louis is talking, I think he was right that that conversation may have been about the recommendations versus the versus what's actually possible. But I think it does speak sort of to our the thought was. I think you're right, Andrew. Is sort of how things progressed. If there were to be an API like this, I can think of a couple of good, decent approaches that we see in things, like Gateway API, something akin to a section name or something like that. I don't know. We could explore, but I would want to try to like caveat it to where it's not super common, because it's easy, right? Like you create one waypoint and like it's a slippery slope, and like I trust that y'all know what you're doing, but not everybody who is trying to onboard to Ambient would know what they're doing. So we just have to try to maybe do it with some care.
Ian?
So I think from like a multi-tenancy model where you have like two teams in different namespaces that are sharing a waypoint. Currently what we do is if you want to bind a policy, you bind it to your own service. And the waypoint just implements that. Saying, oh yeah, we'll allow them to bind a global policy to a waypoint across namespace is probably not the way, even if you're going to hope that they scope it down later. So maybe instead of looking at like scoping it in the policy, we look at a better way to bind it, like bind it to service name star, like in my namespace, meaning all services, or bind it directly to my namespace or something like that, where you don't have to have any inherent trust.
Right. I think that type of approach would be, without having given it too much thought, what would be better, right? As opposed to saying, attach it to gateway, say, or bind to gateway, and inferring the namespace from that or something like that, right? I think we want to stick within the tenancy domain, which is namespace and service, rather than the infrastructure domain.
Yeah, I guess in that case, then you'd say something like my namespace uses the waypoint this, and then you could bind things to. I'm not sure. Okay, so
right, and if cost concern is the primary thing, right? Like the binding API right now is target ref service, right, for authorization policy. It can be probably loosened to be target ref namespace. I don't know if there's a granularity above that we would consider other than admin functions.
I gotta say, I don't know how I feel about target ref namespace, because you don't have a way. Well, I guess we could do it in status, but you have to also make sure the namespace is annotated with use waypoint or something. Like it gets tricky to try to track down what's being captured.
The status would have to be quite explicit.
But yeah, we have the same problem with service right now. Like you can bind to a service that doesn't have a waypoint, and then we have to note that in status. So I mean,
that's fair.
It is solvable. Whether that message means anything to an average person, I don't know at this point. But we could do something like that. Sorry, Leora, I cut you off.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, like, wouldn't target ref namespace be weird if it's a namespace? It's namespace code policy, right? Like we're talking on target ref namespace for authorization policy, or yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's weird, right? Because you wouldn't want to target ref namespace that's not your namespace that you're.
No, it would have to be your namespace, right? So the policy would have to repeat.
Yeah. So one of the things you could do though is like, I mean, it's still weird, but like you could do target ref namespace and disallow itself to do name. So you just do target ref namespace, and it inherently means that it's the namespace that you were in.
Right.
Oh,
I agree with that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You can't bind a policy to a different tenant.
Yeah, the policy should live within the tenant. It should not live, should not span tenants, except for admin policies.
Yeah.
Targeting namespace or targeting my own namespace somehow has a nice capability too, in that you have a way to target workloads. If you just target star service or any service, what should happen in a waypoint that's servicing workloads gets a little bit weird. So
You don't use target ref, right, Ian?
Right, but it's still weird because what then you do? Like, do you use empty selectors or something? Like, it's some of the problems we run into in the gateway. Like, if you use spot selectors, would empty selectors mean all the namespace? And if you use target ref,
No, we would restrict it and say if target ref namespace, you'd have to explicitly name your namespace, and we would validate that it was your namespace, and if it was not, it would not be accepted.
but actually, like the way I started this, like my comment is that I think it would be weird to actually make you name your namespace, because you cannot name your namespace to any other namespace other than yourself. So like, if you do target ref namespace, I would actually vote that you should not be able to use any name.
It should match the namespace of the policy in place.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only case might be if I'm in the admin namespace, we might allow target ref namespace to name an explicit namespace.
Oh, I don't like that.
Yeah, no. But we have to be like real careful with admin policies, right? And the fact that we've overloaded the API for that case.
yeah.
So Andrew, my gut feeling is this is a pretty advanced scenario. I like to see other user asking for this before we add this. That's just my gut feeling, especially there is a workaround that already exists.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so actions that I should tell my colleague would be open up an issue, describing the case better. Maybe I'll add the link here, and build a bit more consensus before it would be worth, really putting time at.
Yeah, Kisu, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a great point, one on getting some more consensus first because of the complexity of the feature. I also have a question to Andrew about maybe solving maybe a different way of looking at the problem. What can we do better to help you right size per namespace? So like, if I think ideally we would have people have a waypoint per namespace in our ideal world. Is there anything we can make smoother to where you feel more comfortable that you can sort of just have separate sets of compute per namespace and that not be a large cost issue? I know in 126 we shipped the gateway API configuration feature where you can set your requests and limits manually. Are there other things that we're missing that might make that experience smoother?
So I'm a bad proxy for this because I've made the argument that we were fine with sidecars everywhere. So just having one envoy per namespace is a lot better than it used to be in this case. So like, I wasn't offended to begin with, but I will pose that question. That's an excellent question. I know within this particular use, this use case is coming from Kubeflow. If anyone knows of Kubeflow,
oh, yeah.
Basically a large multi-tenant, you could have hundreds or thousands of users in a platform, and and so the 999 users that are logged off right now have a waypoint sitting there that is not used, and so there's some argument against that. Like, every user you have in your platform is essentially a waypoint that will sit there forever on your platform. And like, I could imagine the really perfect world, you can think of like if Knative, like a
scale to zero sort of thing.
Yeah, like a scale to zero, and then it pops back up whenever someone tries to do something that it needs I could imagine that as a nice use case. It'd also be, I'm sure, a complexity that's a pain. So
I mean,
That's a great
we've
call
talked
out.
about in the past.
Yeah.
it would be very useful. I don't know if this is a common use case or not, but in this particular case, it would alleviate a lot of problems, or not problems, but costs.
Just a question: does the namespace itself scale down to 0, like the pods and workloads within the service?
No, the same problem does exist for other components within Kubeflow as well. Like I can't remember what it was, but I remember long ago, like 5 years ago at a different job, computing our like dead cost, the cost of just our users that created an account once and never came back. And it was pretty significant. And a piece of that would have been Istio sidecars, but probably just like a 10 or something % chunk.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a baseline cost. Yeah. Okay, Louis.
Yeah, like in general, scaling from 0 on traffic can be a little risky. Scaling from 0 on external user event, a little more reliable.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you could make the argument that maybe the Kubeflow in this case, or whatever the application should be, should make it convenient to scale a namespace or an account down to 0 when there's nothing in there.
Yeah, or hey, Istio, if there are no endpoints in any service, then you might as well scale yourself down to 0, right?
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Right, so we would just be a derivative of the auto scaling going on in the other system.
Yeah.
That first request though would be interesting, because Z-tunnel is sending to a waypoint. If the pod comes up faster than envoy comes up, you can imagine traffic flow trying to get to a waypoint that has no endpoint and Z-tunnel failing that first initial request.
Yeah, though that's still better than. So one, Envoy comes up really fast relative to most applications. So as long as we got the event early enough, right?
It comes up fast, but if that config might not be fast.
Yeah, it needs to get programmed.
Waypoints get programmed pretty fast relative to sidecars these days. It's not perfect, but it's still quite good. Let me put it that way.
That's fair.
It just depends on the complexity of the application, right? Like I don't know the typical Kubeflow application, but if it has to read a bunch of stuff from a database, it's probably slower than Envoy to start up. You may still want, right, some toleration of timeouts and things like that, but ZTOL being L4, there's only so much you can do. Most of this traffic is probably coming in through ingress, if I remember how Kubeflow works anyway. So maybe you have some retry that there.
Yeah, there's trade-offs, but if we did do a scale to 0, you would have to be accepting of the trade-offs that those first initial requests or connections could.
Yeah, it's just one. Like, what's the signal? Like, do you want to be traffic is the signal that you scale up from 0, or do you want to be some external user event, right?
Yeah, I mean,
so depending on who.
If we did this might be interesting for you, Louis. If we did the Z-tunnel health metadata server, that might be an interesting thing for like waypoint health. That then you could maybe do in your readiness probes.
Yeah.
Not great, but it's interesting use case.
Yeah, so I guess there's two kind of functional approaches here. One, Kubeflow decides when things scale up from 0, and it tells us, and we respond to it, or by some derivative of it, like, hey, we see there's an endpoint now in the service, or a pod is starting up in that, so we should proactively schedule, or some other kind of eventing system. Or we're the signal that tells Kubeflow to scale up from 0, which was what happened with Knative and was a giant pain in the neck. But
I was going to mention the Knative thing.
Probably could do a better job now because we have ambient instead of sidecars. There's a little bit more we can do. Anyway, probably not going to be able to get into the weeds of all of that. throw it right up. And specifically because it is Kubeflow, it would be important to know what are the desired scale up, scale down dynamics that are like properties for the end user. Do you want scale up based on traffic, or is it no? There's an external event that says the user has come up, it triggers the scale up, Istio just responds to it.
Yeah. Okay. I will pose this question to the guy who's really asking, and I'll summarize all this and suggest you make an issue and build a consensus and all that stuff, but also, raise these points too. Cool. Thank you.
Stephen.
Yeah, do you mind clicking the link?
I can click the link.
I just ran some quick performance tests on ambient multi-cluster. Louis, we're still on the working group doc. Oh.
2 seconds.
Perfect. And the two, well, there's three, and I just wanted to share, there's no real question here. One is how does connect and then send a byte and then receive that byte back? How long does that take? And with multi-cluster, like if you go across cluster through an east-west gateway, it takes around like 2.5 extra milliseconds. And that's because we're not doing inner H1 connection pooling. And then request response is just a TCP ping on an established connection. And that adds about 0.1 or 2 milliseconds of latency. So these numbers aren't great if they were single cluster, but given that we already are going to need have latency from cross cluster traffic, I don't think say like a 2 millisecond penalty is too bad. Oh, by the way, I did this all locally using kind clusters. And finally, the throughput is around 60% of what it is in single cluster, like if you go within the cluster versus crossing clusters.
Just to be clear, the connect request response is connect request response disconnect?
Yes.
Okay, so it's
but
not.
I'm not sure if the disconnect is getting put into the time.
Well, that would have, right?
Yeah.
It seems like it is, just judging by the number.
Well, I don't.
Like, because like versus like say TCP RR.
Yeah.
Right, which would be ping ponging on a single connection.
Yeah. Well, I think the big like overhead with connect request response is that we do a TLS handshake every time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's going to be a huge overhead.
Yeah.
I guess the question is, because most TCP connections are long-lived.
Yeah.
Right. Either HTTP 1.1, gRPC, H2, database. Right. There are actually very few short-lived TCP connections. So like CRR is not a great measure of multi-cluster performance in general.
But
right, it's not a realistic expectation. TCP RR is more
that
like
one is, and it's on there, and same with the throughput, right?
Yeah, and so that like we do expect a throughput difference between single H-bone and double H-bone. I don't know if we expect it to be 30%.
I think that would be an interesting comparison. I mean, this is good, and I don't think you have to do this, but it would be interesting to have this sidecar comparison, right? Because that's what people are going to be comparing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had in long ago with prototypes or whatever done a test like that, and I forget what the result was, but it was something that they were close enough that I didn't think it mattered, given that typically when you're going cross network, you're going cross network, so there's some latency in the network itself that is exceeding the 0.1 milliseconds or whatever we're adding. So
yeah, I think it would be useful, Stephen, to have a baseline without, well, one with sidecar and then obviously with no mesh.
Mhm.
Just
Yeah,
to,
yeah, definitely. But I think my point here is that these performer numbers are a little bit in line with what we expect, and they're not like breaking, like they're usable.
yeah, I think,
Yeah.
like, given long width connection handling, I don't think the top set of numbers are really actually end user relevant in most cases. The
Mhm.
bottom set are reasonably in line. You could argue around the margins, but what hardware did you run on?
Just on whatever Azure VM I had the day on. I think it's like around 16 cores.
What version of CPU is it?
I think it's a D5. Does anybody remember the command? Less CPU was it? The AMD EPYC 7763 64 core processing.
Sorry. Can you put it in the chat? Sorry.
Yeah. Have you noticed like huge differences?
Yeah, basically every generation of chip is like 10 times faster.
For
Or 3
TLS,
times,
huge.
maybe.
Yeah, there are big differences in TLS. Generation. I'm a bit more familiar with the Intel ones.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand exactly the graphs. You are comparing with Z-tunnel H-bone, global and local, but what are the numbers for raw TCP without any mesh?
Oh, I didn't do that.
Because I suspect the local bandwidth is bigger, the distance is smaller. I mean, it's normal to. I mean, is it global in the same region at least, or what do you mean by global? How global?
Global just means crossing clusters. It's all within one computer.
Oh, it's
So
a
it's
single region
clusters.
computer. It's not going across regions really.
Yeah, because I didn't want to have like the actual
Okay,
like
never
time it
mind.
takes
Never mind.
across regions.
That was okay. Good, got it.
So it's basically two kind cluster in your VM, and you're doing multi-cluster among the two traffic within the two kind cluster.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're okay. So you were using a Milan series, which is Zen 3. That does not have AVX 512 in it, so that's going to hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a bunch of AVX 512 enhancements subsequent to that probably mirror the things that went on in the Intel chips across the previous 3 generations, just knowing how these guys like to compete with each other. So I would strongly suggest you go run the same benchmark on either an Intel 7 series processor or a Zen 5 series AMD processor.
A Gen 5?
Yeah. Because
Okay.
you're on Zen 3, you ran on Zen 3, which is Milan.
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't have AVX 512 in it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to have quite a lot of impact on TLS performance.
Okay. Thank you.
At least for the handshake, that should probably have some significant overheads. Now, we mostly don't care about the handshake because most TCP connections are long-lived. But by all means, do an update with both graphs, TCP CRR and TCP RR.
Gotcha. Okay.
As
And
well
Stephen,
as Nelson said, baseline and sidecar.
Stephen, I was going to ask you, you've got this in a, did you get this in a reproducible format by any chance?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
There's a link at the top.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. So
it's not
should be
exactly
pretty easy
polished, but
cool. That's awesome. Yeah, the good news for me, I think, as we talk about what multi-cluster ambient looks like across the feature status. One of the big questions for me initially was, if double HBone turns out to be horrible for some reason, do we want to lock that API in? But I think with this, I feel even with this number, without a lot of the enhancements, it feels like it's acceptable to keep the API around for double HBone.
I agree. I will also say that a long time ago, we had a big debate about deciding on the protocol that we would use without deciding on the implementation. And as part of that, we did tests of this exact thing. And we had to come to the same conclusion, I believe. So that's good. I'm just saying, we are reaffirming the theoretical numbers with the actual implementation, which is good.
I'm slightly not sure if I agree with you, John. So HBone, double HBone, and it's because it has a reason. I mean, the reason is that we want the gateway to not be able to intercept and to see the actual message. But I think we really want to support both mode where the gateway is terminating and can see the content, which is single HBone, and then forward, and the mode where you have the double HBone. But both of them need to be, kind of recommended for the different use cases. There is, I mean, we have to double HBone, otherwise we don't have any control at the border. But we should not do only double HBone.
Costin, can you describe the use cases that would require single HBone?
For single HBone is for the gateway to actually apply policy enforcement, because you don't trust the two ends.
So any L7 policy or identity aware L4, well, you can apply some identity aware L4 policies, so with double.
Right. I guess my question is, you don't trust either end of the traffic? Costin, that's what you said?
Yes. You don't trust the destination to enforce policies, or because it's under the same user control. But you trust the middle box because that's a point where you actually enforce policies, and it's under the admin control.
It's more like a special case of ingress, actually, than.
Yeah, it's exactly ingress, and we kind of support it, but we need to make sure it's clear that it's one of the supported modes.
So why wouldn't you just use ingress in that case?
Well,
because you don't want it exposed publicly.
Yeah, we don't really have the right modeling in the gateway API for that type of ingress, Keith, I think.
You can put it together with duct tape and some configurations. It's not something possible. Just documentation and kind of the
you can do service entry and change and set it to the IP address for the host name of the gateway. Like that could certainly work.
And the annotations to not assign a public IP address to the gateway. Really, that's a tricky one.
Sure. Yeah. I can buy it. I have a initial hesitation because most users are not going to deploy the they're going to have the east-west gateway typically be public, because that's just the easiest thing. It's what I've seen most consistently. It's what our docs for sidecar and ambient recommend. And so I'm sort of wary to have that actually reading layer 7 protocol, because that makes it susceptible to protocol attacks by the sender. But I wouldn't be opposed to a PR, for example, like that added single HBone, as long as there was like the code would have to be changed to where it could check a setting or something like that. I don't know what the API would look like, but in theory, not against it wholesale. I'm just sort of worried about the the user would have to know what they're doing for sure.
Yeah.
Wait, so in the sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Stephen.
In the single H1 case, with the east-west gateway, re-encrypt and do the handshake with its own identity. So every cross cluster would kind of look to the final workload as sent from the gateway.
That is true. That is a good point.
It's going to look like an ingress.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Right, so it's definitely not a drop-in replacement for east-west gateway doing double H-bone. Absolutely not. No,
Yeah, it's just a different way of thinking.
Yeah, the very different set of properties. Right, we might automate some kind of on behalf of handling to propagate the upstream identity in the header by default instead of making you do the work, right, by configuring the ingress to do that. But right, it's that the downstreams would all, sorry, the upstreams would all have to be aware that that was happening, and like we wouldn't make authorization policy just automatically trust that header or things like that.
Right. I actually was talking to Mike Morris about this. I think either Mike or Mitch, one of the two. But we were thinking theoretically and somewhat where maybe JWT would be helpful here as a header inside the H-bone tunnel for like the on behalf of approach down the line. Like the waypoint is super useful, but it sort of lives in this middle category of infrastructure versus something that's invisible. And so having a job that could like delegate or that could convey that delegation might be interesting down the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a variety of options. Anyway, just Stephen, to make sure we've wrapped up with you, you're comfortable enough with the answers here, and maybe if you have a little time, you can go and make some of the suggested updates to your benchmark.
Yeah,
I mean,
my main point was just to share, but yeah, I appreciate all the feedback, and I'll look into it.
Yeah, if you don't mind testing on Intel as well as N5, if this is repeatable for you, it'd just be nice to get a comparison.
Yeah, I'm not near to any hardware, as long as it's on Azure.
Hey Keith, do you guys have ARM on Azure?
We do have ARM VMs, yeah.
Oh, we have our own Microsoft. We have our own chips, right? Our own ARM chips, the Cobalt ones.
Yes, that is true.
Well, you can run your own benchmark and decide if you want to do your own marketing.
Yeah, I've got some great stories that I don't think I'll share here.
Okay. But yeah, whatever you want to run and share, Steve, we appreciate it. Mm-hmm. Actually, running it across a spectrum of hardware platforms, if you had the time, like, is probably actually useful information for the community at large. Not everybody wants to pay for the latest and greatest. So knowing where the cliffs are versus just incremental differences could be, if you don't want to pay Azure all your money, but just some of your money.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how the Azure hardware stacks up in these spaces.
Yeah, I've seen numbers for a range of Intel chips, but not for the AMD ones actually. So. Okay. But thanks for running this stuff. John, are there benchmarks that we would kind of consider more generally representative of real world? What do we prefer? Do we just prefer to use Fortio nowadays, or?
I typically just use Fortio, which is approximately the same as the RR test, because sending.
Yeah, it's a pain
I mean, if you have a
Yeah, I didn't use Fortio because it didn't have the CR, and I was kind of curious about how bad it would be.
Yeah, you can technically do it. I think you can turn off keep lives with Fortio, which makes it similar. I don't know how much different it behaves. I've definitely run into port exhaustion issues that maybe the CRR thing resolves by something. I don't know. I haven't played around with it much, but I don't think these are invalid results. I just, when I do them, I use Fortio personally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's useful to have another data point. So feel free to just keep using CRR and RR. I assume they do a little bit of less work than Fortio does for roughly the same basic behavior. I don't actually know. This is iPerf 3?
NetPerf, actually. iPerf only does 3.
Okay. But yeah, feel free to ping back in the channel when and if you get results. We'd like to take a look. But yeah, nothing seems out of whack here. Do we have anything else people want to talk about? We have 5 minutes left.
I think Istio's schedule should be out today. In case anybody wants to take a look at that. It's supposed to be out today.
Yeah, I believe it's supposed to be, but it's not currently at the moment.
Yeah.
I'll give you a summary of it though. It's AI, mesh, AI, mesh AI.
Multi-cluster.
Multi-cluster AI. I think that's actually a talk, but I think that's at the main event.
Oh goodness.
I'm shocked.
All right.
Shocked, I say. All right. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, if somebody sees when the schedule is posted, maybe ping the announcement channel.
Sound good. Thanks, folks.
All right.
Thanks.
Cool.